Coming up, is your security program reasonable? Shawn Tuma joins us to explain what that really means. Paul and I discuss the fear of communication, building trust, and why employees are really leaving companies. And the company known as FishMe leads our roundup of tracking security innovation along with Phantom Cyber, Bug Crowd, and a whole lot more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Business Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by, do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending your assets? Have you penetration tested your public assets? Start 2018 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting at blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night.
Hey, everybody, and welcome Business Security Weekly. It's episode 76, recorded live Friday, March 2nd, 2018. Man, this year is flying by. This is the show. We explore the business of security in an effort to improve the security of business. We like to think we're the trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. I am your straight-talking guide to overcome friction and unlock value quicker, Michael Santarcangelo. And back from vacation, not looking nearly as rested as I expected, is the world-famous Paul Asadorian.
It was a staycation.
Well, with three young sons, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. It was fun though. A lot of exciting things going on, especially here at the studio as well. So yeah, it's all good stuff. Moving into new space downstairs.
I'm going to come back up and visit again. I feel like every time I visit, it's completely different. And so,
it is. It's going to be completely different this time. Probably more different than previous visits. It's actually like room to walk now, because we were about 1,000 square feet shy of how much space we actually needed. So, yeah, I was like, wow, we actually have room to walk here in the studio, which is great. It's nice.
It's exciting stuff, man.
Very exciting.
I love how it's all coming together. Well, let's remind people real quick, InfoSec World's coming up. You've seen a lot of the fantastic speakers already across our whole network, and we've enjoyed the conversations. We know that's going to give you a taste of what you're going to enjoy, too. In Lake Buena Vista, Florida, as a Security Weekly family member, you can get 15% off the InfoSec World 2018 main conference or World Pass if you use the code OS18-SW. And our guest today will actually be there as well. So once you get blown away by how awesome he is, you can meet him in person. And I'm sure he's going to love me for saying that. But I'm really excited. We're going to bring Shawn Tuma onto Business Security Weekly. I've known Shawn now for a couple of years. And, I know there's plenty of good lawyer jokes. I don't really have any. Shawn is like downright good person, happy to call him a friend. He's got experience in law and in cybersecurity. And it's not one of those, yeah, I mean, I read about it one time, and then I checked it on Wikipedia. Shawn knows his stuff, and he's been all over the place. And so I reached out and said, Shawn, please come talk to us about reasonable security. Come talk to us about things that, as security leaders, we need to know about. And he said yes. So maybe he's not the smartest lawyer, but Shawn, I'm excited that you're joining us here this week. So thanks.
Well, Michael, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and any chance I get to visit with you and talk about cybersecurity or anything else is a good time for me. And, I don't particularly like lawyers either. That's why I'd rather hang around with security people. So
there you go.
We're in good company here. Let's just forget I'm a lawyer.
I knew there was a way it all worked out. Yeah, just to be fair, I mean, Shawn and I, we've done a lot of collaboration around writing where we look at some of these court cases. So if you've been worried about passwords, you're trying to think about, fingerprints and biometrics versus passwords and what the courts can and can't do. Shawn's the person who's been doing most of that analysis. And I usually call him and say, Shawn, what's really going on here? Mm-hmm. And we have one of those cool conversations, and it turns into an article that helps out a lot of people. So, Shawn, one of the things we've been seeing happen a lot more is this concept of reasonable security. And I know you've written on it a bit, you've talked about it a bit. What does that mean for the security or the business leader today? What does it mean to be reasonable with security?
Well, Michael, what reasonableness means is it has to be unique and tailored for the company. There's no two companies are alike. And what is reasonable is this amorphous definition that we lawyers love because it always gives us something to argue about and fight about and ultimately have a judge or a regulator decide. But what reasonable really means is doing what is appropriate under the circumstances. It doesn't mean doing the absolute best you can, but it certainly doesn't mean doing the bare minimum either. And so to understand reasonableness, you have to understand your unique position in a company, and you have to do what is appropriate under those circumstances.
So how do we judge that? I mean, so what you're saying is it's context, and it's context based on probably the industry I'm in, the size of the company, and the actions I've taken. But so is that measured against other people and similar things, or is it measured against some sort of a more arbitrary standard?
Well, both, actually. It starts with understanding your own company. You have to look at the size of the company, the industry the company's in, the nature of the data the company has, where that data is. Are you consumer facing? Are you B2B? Are you someone that's operating in many different jurisdictions? Because depending upon the jurisdiction, that may determine the standard you're required to uphold. And so you have to understand your unique risks, and that really starts with a thorough risk assessment that looks not only at the traditional IT type stuff, but it encompasses this view that security is no longer an IT issue. It's a full business risk issue. So we have to look at everything involving the business risk surrounding security, and then you build a program that accounts for that and that's designed to solve those risks within the realm of what is reasonable to do. We keep coming back to that word reasonable, but it means prioritizing. It means developing a good sound strategy. And a lot of times it does mean looking at what others in your unique industry are doing, because that may establish at least the floor for what you need to do. But I'll tell you what it is not. It is not some guy that, is a hobbyist, the IT guy, right? That says, oh, yeah, I've got this checklist. You just go by and you check these boxes and then you're good. It's not that. That's one thing I can tell you. It's not that.
I was going to try to be cheeky and use the word reasonable, but I'm going to go ahead and scuttle that.
You have to.
Who needs to initiate this then? So like when we look at so what you're saying is we need to look at the whole business and then prioritize our choices, right? It's that whole I can't do all of it. Even if I had some sort of mythical unlimited budget, I've got to do the things that make the most sense based on a variety of factors. Some of those factors out of our control. Some of those factors lie within our colleagues. So do you see this as a security-driven exercise, and we now need to go build those bridges and work with our colleagues in the other parts of the business and get a better understanding of what they're doing? Or does it come from a different part of the organization and we need to be supportive and participate?
Well, it has to take the full team, okay? You can't just have security solving this problem. You have to have your full business team has to be involved, from your CFO to talk about maybe insurance type issues and how you manage that risk. And many times it's the CFO that does that. You have to have obviously your legal counsel involved, or someone to help you understand the jurisdictional rules that you're operating in. And you have to have executive level buy-in, and they need to be part of that conversation as well. And so what it takes is the full team, but there's something you said that really nailed this issue. It takes strategy. And I do a lot of data breach response work. I have numerous breaches going on at any given minute. I have a really nasty one going on today. And what happens is, what I see in most of my work doing data breach response is it's not a matter of a company not spending money on some tools. Everybody's got a tool or a solution for this, that, and the other. And many times they've spent plenty of money on the assets that they needed, but they don't have like a head coach that's seeing the full big picture of how everything works together, how it's designed to solve the problems, and who's putting that strategy into place. And that's where I think every organization needs a security leader that's not someone necessarily doing the implementation, but that's seeing the big picture and the strategy. Because, criminals are too smart these days. Human error is too frequent. And if someone's not seeing how all that's working together, it's like having a football team, with a great quarterback coach and a great linebacker coach trying to go out and win the Super Bowl. If you don't have a good head coach that's seeing the whole game, the whole strategy, you're really missing out.
So when you've seen this handled properly, who else would you include on that broader part of that team? So if I'm a security person today, Shawn, who do I need to make sure I'm in regular contact with in my organization?
Well, it depends on the size of your organization. If you're a small company, if you're a startup, it might just be a couple of you, right? But if you're a larger company, you obviously, if you have a CISO, the CISO, I think, drives a lot of this, and they're uniquely positioned to kind of be that head coach, in my view. But you've got to have the CFO, you've got to have the general counsel. You need someone from HR involved, because as we all know, human error accounts for so much of this. You've got to have a way of communicating with your workforce. And then if you are going up the food chain, a larger organization, you need buy-in from your board of directors. Ideally, you would have someone that's, on the board that has a strong interest in security and is knowledgeable of it, and have them participating, or at least being reported to and showing an active interest, because that then sends the message down to your executive team to say, look, we have to do more than just, run our mouths here. We have to actually put some effort in. We have to spend some money. I mean, this is no longer an issue that you can look at and say, I just want to, let me just spend a little bit of money on this, make it look good. Security is expensive now. This is a huge problem, and it's not going to be cheap, but you've got to devote those resources to it. So, it depends on the size of your organization. I mean, but those are the key players that absolutely need to be involved in those discussions.
Shawn, my question is, how has the impact of a breach changed, and how also the follow-on to this, how has it impacted a lot of these risk discussions when we talk about a breach?
Well, the second part's real easy. How does it impact the risk discussions? My best clients for proactive risk management are the ones that just had a breach. And I've had some where I've spent a lot of effort talking with them about proactive efforts we could take to manage their risk pre-breach, and get run out of the room because it's not a priority. It's not something worth spending money on. And then they have a breach, and the first thing I hear is, well, how quickly can you fix this? And why can't you fix this? And why is this so difficult? And then I have to remind them, look, this is what I was trying to tell you for the last 2 years, and you wouldn't listen to me. Now you want me to fix everything, and it's not fixable. You don't just fix a breach the way you go out and settle a lawsuit and make it all go away, And so they're much more motivated post-breach to take real meaningful steps and spend some resources in doing that. Now, how does the breach impact the organization, and how has that changed? One, we saw with the Equifax breach a huge shift in public interest in breaches, almost to the magnitude of what we saw back with the Target breach. And I've been doing this kind of work, in cyber law since 1999. And I'll tell you, before, in 2011, we had some significant breaches that we thought were going to be a game changer. They really weren't. It wasn't until we had the Target breach, the Home Depot breach at the end of 2013 that really woke people up. What do they say? I'm woke now. They were woke now. And Equifax moved that needle again because of the size of it and because of the emotions surrounding it. But really, public attention, PR, media, and bad publicity is what is terrifying these companies the most right now. The litigation, we haven't seen as much of a movement in that really as I thought we would see by this time. Litigation's not a big threat. Regulatory investigations are a significant threat, but they're not nearly as big as the concerns that companies have over bad publicity and over the media getting a hold of this and running with it.
What about in Yahoo's case where it affected the valuation of their company?
Yeah.
Man, that's a huge issue. Companies that are on the verge of a merger or an acquisition, that was a substantial hit. And as I recall, Yahoo, it might have been, was it 500 million that they reduced the price by?
Something like that.
It was about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and they still didn't even acquire all the liability for it. They still left much of the liability. They proportioned it out and left much of the liability with Yahoo. But that is a huge issue. And we're really just seeing companies, or all but the largest companies, waking up to that. And what I've seen, your enterprise level Fortune 500 type companies, they're pretty mature in their understanding of this risk. That doesn't mean they're doing everything they should, but they're pretty mature in their understanding of it. Your smaller companies than that, they're still not seeing all of these different areas, such as, if I'm going to go out and acquire a company, do I realize that I'm acquiring all of their liability? And even if I write a contract that says, nope, you're going to be responsible for, 50% of it. Well, guess what? All you have then is a contract. You don't make them legally responsible. You're still responsible. You just have to go collect it from them and make sure they comply with their obligation. Companies don't see that right now unless they're really, really large, sophisticated companies.
I think that's a really key point, Shawn, because, you and I, we spend a lot of time looking at how people are handling a lot of this. And this is where I think a lot of our industry, they flinch when we say cyber insurance and they're like, oh, that means we failed. And I think you're quick to point out there's a lot of things that happen post breach that are expensive. And what we're seeing with the decent insurance companies now is they know how to quarterback that properly, or whatever phrasing we're supposed to use to make everybody happy. And it's not just about what you did or didn't do beforehand that starts to bite you when you look at how all this comes around.
That's exactly right, Michael. I look at this and what I try to get companies to understand is we all have incidents all the time. There's a difference between a cyber incident or a cybersecurity incident and a data breach. Okay, a data breach is a legal definition. That means you've breached a legal obligation and you've got to fulfill legal requirements. Many times, the incidents that happen to a company turn into a data breach because they didn't know how to handle the incident, or they didn't have the resources available, or a small data breach turns into a really nasty one because they didn't handle and respond properly to that initial very small matter. And the unfortunate matter is sometimes for all but really large companies, for your small to mid-sized businesses, they don't have the resources available to properly respond to a small breach or to an incident in a way to keep it from blowing up into a really nasty breach. That's where your cyber insurance is so valuable, because a small company, may not have the money to shell out 25 grand for forensics, or 50 grand, or 100 grand for forensics, or 40 or 50 grand for notifications, to the individuals. And so they don't comply, or the legal fees, to say very self-serving, to get the guidance. But if they have cyber insurance with a good carrier, that cyber insurance will pay to handle it properly. And they'll oftentimes have panels of pre-screened professionals, such as myself, that can come in and guide you through that process. So if you don't know who to call, they can tell you who to call and get that arranged for you. And it really helps keep a small manageable incident from becoming something, really newsworthy.
So let me ask a question, because I see a lot of confusion around this, and let's see if we can clear it up. We were just talking about the way that people put something in a contract and they'll say, oh, no, I pushed that onto you. And as you pointed out, well, kind of, all you have is a contract. You've got to go collect it. So now I see people will say, well, it's okay. I got cyber insurance. We're covered. But there's a distinction between what is covered for you and what's covered on behalf of somebody else. And typically that's what, first party versus third party. So what do people need to think about with that?
Well, really, 2 points I want to address there. One, what you said about people thinking, oh, I put that liability in a contract, or now someone else is responsible for it. Or, I put that data with a third party and now they're responsible. Bull. That does not change your legal responsibility for that data. It gives you a contractual right against that third party, with the hopes that they're going to do what they need to do. And if they don't, they're going to be able to fulfill their responsibilities and not go bankrupt and say, oh, sorry, you're stuck holding it, right? So contracts, are only worth the paper they're written on unless you can actually go out and enforce it. But as for the cyber insurance, you have first party versus third party claims. First party usually means things that happen to your organization, right? So if you're a company and you have first party insurance and you get hit with a cyber attack and it encrypts your server and makes your server worthless, and you can't get it decrypted, and you've got to go out and get a new server. If you don't have first party insurance, it's likely not going to cover the harm to your company. Okay, but if you have third party insurance, and let's say you have a bunch of patient data or customer data on that server, then that insurance will kick in to cover the trying to recoup that data, rebuild that data, restore that data. And then it will cover giving notifications out to those individuals whose data it was, who need, to be notified of the incident and all that stuff. And so you need to think about your coverages and make sure you're getting coverage for both yourself and the losses you will sustain, as well as your obligations to other parties, those third or nth parties, because it goes on down the list from there.
So if somebody says we've got insurance, we're covered, our follow-up needs to be what's covered exactly and what amounts and how many incidents. And we have to get a little bit smarter about asking some of those questions. It sounds like. What other big lessons have you learned? I mean, you and I have been talking about this space a lot. We've watched a lot of these changes. Paul brought up Yahoo. I think that's probably one of the first cases where we have some actual harm in terms of financial loss that we can point to. But is the tide turning, or is there a trend that people need to start paying attention to, or what's something that's still kind of top of mind for you right now?
Well, one thing I would say is, just because we can't always quantify harm from the outside looking in, doesn't mean there's not a lot of harm to the company. I can tell you, when I get a call from a client that's had a serious incident that's likely to be a breach, the harm to their company is, man, it shuts down for everything but managing that incident. Okay. That's a lot of opportunity value that's being lost, that's never quantified from the outside. It doesn't show up many times in stock prices. It doesn't show up in, your valuations and, expenses and when you're quantifying that loss. But there's a lot of loss there that people don't appreciate. Not to mention the fact it scares the hell out of them too. And there's sleepless nights for them. But the other thing that I really think is important is for people to understand, that we are so preoccupied with wanting to blame Russia for everything that happens. For God's sakes, if somebody's car doesn't start, Russia hacked their car and took over their computer or whatever, right? We have created almost like a victimhood type mindset of thinking we're helpless to protect ourselves. And why even go through the effort? Because, the Russians or the Chinese or the North Koreans are going to attack us. Look, in the numbers of data breaches and cyber attacks, if you want to call them that I deal with, that involve that sophisticated James Bond type, create this super malware that's undetectable. That's so minimal compared to the numbers of cases that may have been the Russians, but it started with a phishing email, or it may have been, a serious ransomware virus. But it started because people were using Windows XP and weren't, updating their software. We've got to bring it back to reality and understand that most of our problems as an organization are going to come from things that we can handle if we devote the time and energy and have a program in place that enable us to go through a process of managing it. How many organizations spend money on sophisticated, AI type endpoint detection, but they've never trained their workforce on what they expect them to do. They've never given them decent policies and procedures that teach them how to protect the data from their standpoint or why they need to do it. These people aren't clairvoyant. They don't just know this inherently. If you don't, it's like our children. If you don't teach them, how do you expect them to know?
I think that's a great point. It's something I've said a lot. Shawn, you've talked to a lot of people. Do you think it's that we're not prioritizing it? We don't see it as something worthy of being done, or that we're not actually sure what to teach people or how to teach them?
Man, that's some great questions. I don't think it's that we don't want to do it. I think we think a sophisticated problem requires this really sophisticated approach to solve. And we take for granted some of the more basic things. I think that's one aspect. I think another is that we oftentimes don't know what to teach people. So for me, it starts with just finding simple things. All learning is based on prior knowledge and understanding. So just start. I do a training with companies that I work with, and literally it's pictures, of a thumb drive. And I'm like, I remember what it was like to be a young attorney at a really big law firm, and new policies and procedures would come out and you just be like, oh God, here they are trying to make my life miserable again. Right. But if someone would have explained to me, Shawn, the reason we don't want you picking up a thumb drive from the parking lot and using it is because the freaking Iranian nuclear power program was brought down because of a thumb drive in the parking lot. People do malicious things. It's not because we're trying to deprive you of a $20 thumb drive, but it's because these are known risks and here's what can happen with it. And when you explain it to people like that, they're like, oh, wow, I get it. There's something real to that. You mean that email from the 22-year-old girl to me, the 48-year-old guy, saying, hey, hottie, isn't real? Well, yeah, it's really not. I mean,
Look at you
guess
ruining
what?
the dream of everybody, Sean.
Ah.
What you're saying then is that we need to be reasonable in our explanations about security to people as part of our drive to attain reasonable security.
Yeah.
Too much like a dad joke there? All right.
I love dad jokes. I fit them.
Yeah, they've become a staple for me as well. And if Paul hasn't yet, he's on the fast path to that. Sean, I love it when you're here to join us and share insights. I'm glad you finally got it onto this program with us. Between your jaunts at CNN and all the other highfalutin places you like to visit. But hopefully you'll be able to come back sometime and join us again on Business Security Weekly. We're going to take a quick break. It's a good chance for you to check us out at securityweekly.com. Check out our full line of programming, including our new shows like Application Security Weekly and Secure Digital Life, all designed to make your job just a little bit easier, maybe help you get some reasonable security. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how afraid people are just to communicate at work. It's going to blow you away, or not.